They found the camp afire and a stack of some 400 bodies burning. American soldiers then went into Landsberg and rounded up all the male civilians they could find and marched them out to the camp. The former commandant was forced to lie amidst a pile of corpses. The male population of Landsberg was ordered to walk by and ordered to spit on the commandant as they passed. The commandant was then turned over to a group of liberated camp survivors. Those were the words of a man who witnessed the liberation of one of Dachau's subcamps. When the Americans entered the main site of Dachau, they discovered a camp which was synonymous with torture, execution and suffering. What came next was a series of reprisals, executions and shootings of former guards of Dachau, and many of the former prisoners of the camp, with vengeance and hatred in their hearts, attacked their former guards and many were killed. Bodies of prisoners lay all around Dachau, and the Americans themselves gained some instant justice for the men who had caused such suffering. But one man who was executed in the moments after liberation was a man placed in control of Dachau's surrender, the final Dachau commandant, Heinrich Wicker. He was ordered by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, to pass the camp to the Allies without any bloodshed, but he became a victim of the liberators and the prisoners. But what happened with the death of the final commandant of Dachau? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Heinrich Wicker was born in June 1921, and as the Second World War broke out across Europe, he was in his later teenage years. But as a young boy, he became a member of the Hitler Youth. This group for boys was established to raise a future army loyal to Hitler of millions of young soldiers by the time the war would come around. In this, young boys learned how to fire weapons, do military drills and exercises, and they were further indoctrinated into the Nazi beliefs and the policies. Hitler himself wanted this force to give their lives for him, and during the war a number of Hitler Youth battalions would fight the Allies and the Soviets. Before he turned 16 years old, Heinrich Wicker joined the SS Death Heads unit, and these were the people who would staff and work inside the concentration camps. He was very young, but I think that his age and his devotion to the SS shows the level of indoctrination he had received for many years, to the point where the young Heinrich Wicker was a very ardent Nazi. In November 1938, he was based inside of Dachau concentration camp, and this was the first site of suffering which was opened inside of the Third Reich. Wicker, as the Second World War plunged Europe into its darkest days, was part of the Waffen-SS, the armed forces and military battalions of the SS, who were some of the most elite German forces, and he was there on the front lines of the German invasions of nations such as France, Belgium and the Netherlands. He was just a teenager at the time, but then as Hitler ordered troops to travel to the east for the impending invasion of the Soviet Union, Heinrich Wicker was sent to prepare for Operation Barbarossa. Wicker fought on the Eastern Front, and during the Battle of Demyansk, he was seriously wounded and was evacuated from the front to recover. His injuries were deemed that serious that he would not fight again with the SS on the front lines, and he was then found work by the SS inside of the local headquarters of the main economic and administrative office. He had took part in a number of leadership courses, but with further promotion, in June 1944, Heinrich Wicker was sent back to the concentration camps to work. He arrived at the Natzweiler Struthof camp within former French territory, and he was a commandant of a subcamp there. He was known for his rough treatment of the prisoners, and gained a very fearsome reputation for himself. But let's remember that he was just at the time around 23 years old. He loved power, and was made the commandant months later of the Mannheim-Sandhöfen subcamp. But as the Second World War was not going well for the Germans, many guards were being sent from the camps to go and fight, and with this Wicker, being not fit for service, remained, and he capitalised on his power. When he was the commandant of his subcamp, he carried out terrible tortures and executions. One incident saw Wicker execute himself a Polish woman who had been accused of sabotaging the work inside one of the factories. But as the war turned against the Germans further, Wicker led a number of death marches. These were forced deportations and movements of thousands of concentration camp prisoners from camps which were close to Allied advancements, and scores of people were sent towards the German heartlands and other camps and sites such as Bergen-Belsen. Wicker, on the orders of Heinrich Himmler, tried to ensure that there was no prisoner that fell into the hands of the Allies, and on one of his marches, he and his officers executed hundreds of prisoners. On the Hessenthal Death March, there were 170 prisoners who were shot, or who died because of the conditions they were being kept inside of during the march. If a prisoner could not keep up, they were often shot straight on the spot. The final job and position as the war was coming to an end for Heinrich Wicker saw him being sent back to Dachau concentration camp. On the 28th of April 1945, upon the orders of Heinrich Himmler and other SS officials, Wicker was made the final Commandant of Dachau. But he was in the post for roughly 24 hours, as he would be executed and killed shortly after taking the job. His only role and position was to surrender Dachau to the Americans, and specifically General Henning Linden of the 42nd Infantry Division of the 7th US Army. Wicker specifically was ordered to do this, as the former Commandant Martin Weiss had abandoned the site, and Wicker had roughly 560 guards loyal to the SS and the Nazis under his command and control. Most of these, though, were Hungarians who had been brought in to guard the prisoners in the final months. When the Americans liberated Dachau, the US soldiers found untold terror and horror everywhere. The Americans discovered 39 railway boxcars, of which there were 2,000 corpses parked up in the railway next to Dachau. There were more bodies everywhere, and it was truly disgusting and disturbing. The American forces at this time developed a sense of vengeance and anger, and they wanted to put a number of the former guards to the sword. As the liberators moved inside of the camp, they found more and more bodies, and they also found a number of other guards who were sheltering. What came next was reprisal attacks and executions upon the former guards of Dachau. There were disarmed SS guards who had been gathered together and collected around a coal yard. There were roughly 40 of them in this store, which was enclosed by a high wall. These German prisoners were guarded by an American machine gunner team, and as the Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks left the men to go and inspect other parts of Dachau, he heard one of the Americans shout, "They're trying to get away." The machine gun fired, and in this, the 19-year-old who was manning the weapon fired bullets into the German captives. Sparks would later state of this event, "It was a foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during the day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being more accurate. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regiment attack, almost all of the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. There was more shooting and execution around the site, as Germans were shot by the Americans. It was said that some of the Nazis were rounded up and executed along with the guard dogs, but there were dozens more who were attacked by the prisoners, who swarmed over the wire and grabbed the Americans and lifted them to their shoulders. Other prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed one or two prisoners out of his way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed. The American forces also allowed this to happen. But Heinrich Wicker, the last Commandant of Dachau, who was brought to Dachau for just a day, was subjected to this sort of execution and treatment. Now, it's not known for certain exactly what happened to him, and specifically when he was killed. Heinrich Wicker was photographed for a final time alive near to the boxcars where the bodies of the inmates were located, and he had been told to show the US forces these boxcars. However, recently a piece of research discovered the bloody and brutal fate of the last Commandant of Dachau. A photograph has emerged in which there is a dead SS German officer inside of Dachau, and this appears to be Heinrich Wicker. The officer is lying on his back on the floor, and he's been shot. His face is battered and bloody, alluding to the fact that he was most probably shot by American forces, and that it was the prisoners who may have brutalised and battered him to death. He may have been put out of his misery by a gunshot also. As mentioned, there is some debate regarding this image, as it's not been confirmed to have definitely been Heinrich Wicker, despite the resemblance. He was an experienced and ardent Nazi, and was just 23 years old when he was given command of Dachau for a day. His command and power was limited, as he was a man ordered to surrender the first concentration camp to the Allies. Heinrich Wicker was executed and brutalised by the prisoners, or the Americans, who wanted to carry out vengeance upon a man who for some time had been placed in charge of other concentration camps and sites of torture. Despite being in his early 20s, Wicker was a notorious and loyal SS man. He was a former soldier of the Eastern Front, and was someone who would stop at nothing to carry out the will of the Nazis. But as the camp was liberated, he became one of those Nazis who died inside of Dachau during the reprisals. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.